Welcome everyone to probably first out of my two videos for today um, here at Ron Guns Art and Fitness. Decided to make this second video just to elaborate a little more on the beginning of my story of weight loss in general. So as I mentioned in the previous video, I used to be 385, 390. Usually when I talk about this to people, usually their jaws drop because they're like, what? That big? And the most commonly asked question is, this dog needs to shut up, by the way, is how did I let myself get so big? Especially when, you're born and raised in New York City, where you can walk around everywhere, this and that, so on, and, you got the Four Seasons and this and that. I had to really think about that one. It's like, damn, how did I get that big? But before I got that big, things were a little bit different, right? So let's turn back the clock a little. Back in junior high, growing up, I was always a bigger dude. That's just a given. It's always been that way for the most part. I don't really recall ever truly being a twig. It just never happened. I never had the whole skinny boy issue. It was always the big guy issue. So back in junior high, going in, I was always being called fart boy because, well, back in 5th grade in elementary school, I had a little gas problem, Couldn't stop farting, and, everyone picked on me for it. And I was extra big. That didn't do me any favors either. Pimply at that. I was picked on a lot. I was bullied around a lot, back in 7th grade especially. I used to be called a fat this and a fat that, and, all the expletives you can think of. Right? And then one day, this kid called me the fat F word, and I had enough. Ended up pushing him, and next thing you know, we were just scrapping in Mr. McHour's English class, and we were just scrapping. And then as soon as the assistant teacher told us to stop, I stopped immediately. It wasn't the last fight. There weren't many fights that I had, but it was one of these things where it was like, all right, Ron, you don't want to go down a bad path of constantly having to fight someone because, this and that, and because you don't want to just not put up with crap anymore, It was kind of tough because it's like, damn, man, like, can I get no respect around here? Seriously? You know what I'm saying? But eventually, it was late spring in 7th grade, and all of a sudden I saw a sign that said, after school weightlifting. And I was like, Sure enough, went in. It was my first time in a weight room. I had never been into the weight room in my junior high at any point up until then. So it was with Mr. Sheehan, and went in there. I signed up, and literally every day in the school semester, after school, I'd go. Straight up. I would just go and lift. Because the other thing that would always pop up is, I didn't put up with the bullying anymore, but I was always called weak. I didn't take kindly to being called weak. I can't even deal with that now. So, if that's of any indication. So, I ended up going in there lifting, just hitting, the Smith machines and everything. They didn't have anything advanced yet. And of course, I was 13, 14 years old. So what were you expecting, right? And then, I just took a liking to it, So even 8th grade and everything, I did notice that my weight was finally beginning to lean down a bit, because even at 13, 14, I was like 285. So that was an issue in and of itself already while I was young. Like, I already had the issue. It was already an issue, as a teenager. And I'm going to get more into this later on in this video. So I went into high school, right? I went to FDR High School. And literally every opportunity I got to pick a phys ed class, I always pick weightlifting. The only time I didn't end up in there was the semester when I had to, take the required health education class, which was a mix of both health ed and sex ed, all in one. Uh, and the times where for some reason they gave me a program change and they had me in badminton class, basketball class, and then a cardio class, which kind of screwed things up because every time I was in weightlifting class, I was able to actually bring my weight all the way down to 230, 240, 250 and keep things stable. And so when it came to the exercise aspect, I was able to take care of myself easy. Now, the part where things would kind of go off kilter, of course, it was the other important element, when it comes to fitness and taking care of yourself, and that's your diet, right? So my diet was never the greatest in the world, and I, of course, made some choices that when I would bring it up to my girlfriend, she'd be like, "Yeah, that's a bit questionable." I'm like, "Yeah, like some of the crazy sandwiches I used to make. I used to make ham, cheese, mayo. Okay, sounds logical. Then throw in the peanut butter, jelly, chocolate sprinkles, and hot sauce. Ronnie, what are you thinking?" Don't ask. I have no explanation on that one. I don't know what I was doing or why I was doing such a thing. When it came to eating at home, I mean, I had my rice, I had my pasta, I had my beans, but here was the thing: I loved my fruit, but when it came to veggies, I dodged veggies like the plague. All those times, when we were kids, we were always told, eat your vegetables, right? And most of the time, you know, yeah, like no one, I just didn't listen. If I had known that back then, everything that comes with vegetables, I would have been eating forever and my health would have been 20 times better. Um, and I had a love relationship with pizza and fried chicken. And what didn't make it any better was the fact that fried chicken and pizza was literally 2, 3 blocks away from my apartment building in Brooklyn. It was that bad. So, you know, between fried food at home and also having a sweet tooth, and I'm talking like candy, I'm talking soda, processed juices, everything. Like I didn't have a good handle on it, you know. So despite all the weightlifting and everything, it's like they say, you can't outtrain a bad diet. As sure enough, when I graduated high school, even when I was going to college and everything, I wasn't going to a gym. Even my college gym, I didn't really put any effort into it. Um, I didn't truly watch what I was eating. And even people at church, when I used to go to church and everything as a kid and stuff, they used to tell me, "Listen, you gotta watch what you're eating, kid. Like you're beginning to gain weight, this and that." I didn't listen. That's the reality of it. Okay, there's like back then I kept making excuses and I didn't really, you know, I didn't listen to the advice that was being given to me out of goodwill. Out of the best interest people had for me as a person, especially with how young I was. Um, so then, sure enough, I'm in college, and the next thing you know, a couple of years later, 2007, 2008, you know, I'm 380, 390, you know. When my sister passed away, my youngest sister at 14 years old, it was due to asthma. And the thing with her was that, we kind of knew she had asthma when she was around 8, 9 years old. But the thing was, it got worse because she'd be allergic to more and more things in terms of food and everything, to a point that after a while, it was like, what else are you going to eat, without ending up in the hospital? That's neither here nor there. She passed away, and then, as I mentioned in my previous video, one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that I didn't make myself another victim of poor self-management of my health. right? Luckily for me, my uncle was a personal trainer, and he worked at a gym, and it was about a month after my sister passed away. He offered me a chance to work at his gym. So I was like, okay, you know, told me what my job was gonna be, this and that, whatever. All I had to do was just apply, yada yada yada. Got in, and one of the first things, that ended up happening, throughout all this was saying bye bye to soda. So that's just step one in terms of the changes I started making for myself. Getting rid of soda, getting rid of Tropical Fantasy, getting rid of Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, Mountain Dew, all the mug cream soda. Bye bye to all that. Gotta cut that off. Cut that off, and I embraced tea, drinking tea. It was great. From cutting that off, I ended up dropping like a good 10, 20 pounds. Easy the first few months. When it came to my training, a lot of it was cardio, because at first it was just getting myself moving, getting my body moving, before jumping back into the weights and everything. It was just my mobility, because my mobility sucked. It was bad enough that prior to getting back in the gym and working at a gym, I had fractured my left ankle, sprained my right one simultaneously back in 2006 when running down the stairs trying to catch a train. There was that, right? Thankfully, I ended up being surrounded by a lot of good people. Back at the gym I was working at, and this was over in Midwood. I met my friend Shani. There was Andre Huete. Obviously my uncle as well. My cousin Louis, who is now in charge of lab athletics, who has made a career of being a personal trainer to this day right now, and young, very experienced, amazing individual. And I also ended up meeting, who I will review later on in another video today, Remson Noir. I ended up meeting him when he was just starting as a trainer. And I was this big, massive goop, that needed to get his life together. And just to kind of simplify year one for me of 2008, that whole summer going into winter and everything, it was really getting rid of the fast food. And it was the hardest thing for me, honestly, especially when in New York City, fast food is everywhere. It's everywhere. You got the good stuff, and then you have the killer stuff, and it's just everywhere you went. There was an all-you-can-eat buffet, there was Chinese, there was pizza, there was fried chicken. You name it, it's everywhere in Brooklyn. You can't dodge it. So there was a lot of willpower issues that I needed to deal with. Thankfully, I discovered sushi at the time, right? And also finding ways of eating less of all this junky stuff, and then just embracing all the more whole foods in there in the process. And this is just year one. So then eventually ended up picking up, squatting, deadlifting, benching, and learning how to work with different muscle groups. And then some of the stuff that I learned back in high school in weightlifting class, my memory started jogging back in. And that's when I started putting things together and everything. The one key factor that I do have today that I did not have back then was tracking my food. Technology was different back then. A smartphone, you better have had money to have one at the time. Now you could just get one, just by farting, and there you go. You got an Android, or you can easily get on eBay, get an iPhone. It was a little different back then. Technology was different back in 2008. The era was different. YouTube was new as new can be, right? So 2008 really was like just the beginning for me. So by the end of 2008, I had gone from that 385, 390 down to at least 365 and 345, 335, right? And I'm going to leave it right here at this point right here in the video because it is a little lengthy. But then again, I felt it was very important to talk about everything that led up to my first year of dropping the weight. All right. So everyone, thank you for your time, and until next time.